Our panel today is going to talk about how do we address data gaps. So for those of us that have been doing number crunching, we realize when we're doing that, the amount of data that we're missing and the gaps that are there. As an economist, I've been doing a lot of data crunching throughout my career. So it's where we see where the problems around interoperability, about the lack of access of high quality data, about the stories that are not there, the populations that are not represented in data. But this panel is also going to look ahead and look at the progress that is being made around very imaginative ways, innovative ways to actually bridge that gap. So first, I'd like to start with a round of conversations on the gaps and the conversation on these challenges. So I'd like to pass the floor to Gabriela Ramos, ADG of UNESCO. Thank you, Gabriela.
Thank you so much, Lorrayne. Great to see you here and great to be here with you. I'm coming from UNESCO, who has really gotten 193 countries to sign to this recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. So maybe I'm not going to be the data crunching kind of type of comment. What I would say is that what we have been hearing is how much the fact that you have half of the world not connected to stable internet access, the fact that you have many communities not represented in the data, lead the conversation beyond the question of privacy to fairness. And therefore, what you put in is what you get out. And if you don't have women represented, when you develop hiring tools, it will discriminate against women. But then you have some other communities overrepresented. We know all these criminal records that overrepresent Black communities. So I think that we really need to bring this to a systemic understanding of the lack of representation in that data that is bringing us to this situation. Fast forward, ChatGPT, browsing the whole of internet. So what do we mean about quality? If you're not even ranking, what are you feeding into the system when you're just getting whatever is there in the internet with anonymity and all of these things? So I feel the question here is, how do we bring these people that are not represented, and how do we ensure that the developers also understand that this is happening? Moving forward, not only the data, the teams developing the tools, 85% male from the north. And again, those biases just get crunched into the data, into the AI, and you just move forward. Finally, let's just talk about data of data. What kind of data? Administrative data, Lamia mentioned that, the business data. We're looking at neural data, no frame whatsoever. And therefore, there is data that you use in certain ways, and there are data that can be abused. And therefore, what we are saying is we need to increase the capacities to deliver a much more representative data sets that will curtail these unfair outcomes that we are having with the current business model.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. And that is a perfect segue to the work that Krista Jones-Baptista does at Data2X. So I'd like to give you the floor and talk a little bit more about examples and illustrating the issues around gaps in data.
Great. Thanks, Lorrayne, and thanks to MasterCard, Data.org, and Rockefeller for the opportunity to be here. Data2X was founded about 10 years ago, and really our focus was on putting gender data gaps specifically on the map and focusing and shining a light on the lives of women and girls and gender diverse people, and looking at the ways that that data is available, increasing availability, quality of the data, and use. We heard a little bit about that earlier today, but how are we using this data to make informed decisions, both at the activity level as well as the policy level and the global level? So that's what we focus on, and so I'm delighted to be here. We really see there's still significant gaps in comprehensive and accurate data about women and girls, and that can lead to incomplete, missing, and biased information. And this is really because there's underinvestment in data sets, and a lack of prioritization. And this hinders, as I mentioned, evidence-based policies, measurement of gender equality in the SDGs, and progress, and then really understanding lived experiences. And this is so important. We've heard already about climate change, global crises, and really looking at how to help governments and companies collect and use this data with good ethics and with good planning, and integrating it into the new tools and the new challenges that we're facing. So just to hone in on an example, one from our recent work, Data2X leads a global partnership around women's financial inclusion. And we know that women's financial inclusion can lead to greater resilience within communities and can help women tackle some of the other challenges they're facing, such as around health, education, and caring for their families. And so some research that we've done really looking at financial access, and this field has been around for decades, but what we did in the last few years is really look at how likely women are to borrow, and we know that they're 23% less likely to borrow from financial institutions and 18% less likely at the global level to save. And we know that they are far less likely to have a bank account, and that number greatly increases, especially with fintech. And so really looking at where the gaps are and providing usable tools is where we're going to go. But I'll talk about that. And just wanted to highlight those gaps and how that ties in across sectors.
Thank you so much, Krista. So now to Shikoh Gitau, I'd like you to share your experience as an entrepreneur, as someone with experience in African emerging markets. What example can you share with us that illustrates data gaps?
Thank you very much. So when I saw the title of this panel, I asked myself, crunch what data? Because one of the biggest challenges that I've come across is the data just does not exist. It is not there. It's incomplete. And whatever is there is not managed well. So it's something that was collected in 1999 in a PDF form. No, this is true story. So when you ask for data, they just go and get for you some documents, actual documents, and give it to you. You have to go and type it or try and extract it on an actual paper, not PDF, that you can extract data. So that is a big problem. And so I sit here as the CEO of Qhala, but I also represent the Lacuna Fund as a steering committee. So I'm going to speak from both ends. So at the very beginning of COVID, we had a challenge of modeling COVID and informing our government on what decisions to make around COVID. And guess what we didn't have? We didn't have enough data to do this. And why? Because every donor organization that supports a health program in Africa has their own small data silo. So when it's at pandemic at a national level, where you need access to all this data, it's very, very hard because you can't have one single view of how the country is doing, in terms of like comorbidities of, say, COVID. It was really, really hard, and having those conversations with them. So not only is that if the data is there, it's siloed and everybody has a big padlock on top of it to try and access that data. And so for COVID, when we were working on it, that was the biggest challenge for us. We wanted this data to help us solve a big global problem at a very local level. We were relying on models that were being created in China, in the US, in Europe to try and form our continent, which was very specific and unique. And as the data has shown in the last 3 years, some of the things that were assumed in Europe and the US were not applicable to the continent of Africa. So that is a big problem. So for us, as a team, we are trying as much as possible to try and say, find the data, type out those Excel sheets, one data cell at a time. So because we have to solve that one problem before we start talking about ethics, with responsibility, equitability, the data must first exist.
Thank you so much. That's such an important point and so relevant for so many different countries in the Global South. Now I'd like to pass the word to Holly, who works as the project manager at the World Bank Data Lab.
Thank you. Yes, so the data gap that we focus on is access to the frequent and granular data that is often held by the private sector. And by access, we mean how do you find these data? How do you know which data could actually support your project? And if you find those data, how do you get the license rights to use those data? And then if you can sign that license after a year or so, you need to securely host those data and manage them and then responsibly use them, hopefully for impact. So to solve this challenge, the World Bank along with the IMF, the Inter-American Development Bank, the OECD, and the UNDP, we formed the Development Data Partnership. And with a little seed money from the Rockefeller Foundation, thank you, Evan, if you're around, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we did it. We are now a consortium of 9 dues-paying international organizations. We collectively share the costs of running the partnership, and 30 on-demand, pro bono data providing companies, including Google and LinkedIn and Meta and Planet. And in times of crises and disasters, for our organizations to be able to leverage these data sets within days, it makes a huge difference. To date, we have supported almost 300 projects covering 13 sustainable development goals, and we couldn't be more proud. But the question was about challenge. So the challenge for us now is, it kind of hurts to say it, but international organizations cannot solve all of the world's challenges. So how can we take the solution that we've created, the technical, legal, and governance architecture, to solve this challenge for civil society and researchers so we can direct the data to the most relevant need? Stay tuned.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for underlining the issues around technical, legal, and governance challenges, because the solutions, they need to rely on that. Governance is usually the sticky part of the equation, right? And now I want to move the conversation to the solutions. And I'll go back to Krista to share some of your work and what you're doing to address some of the gender gaps that you mentioned earlier.
Great, thank you. I love talking about solutions. We know some things that work, but we are also still learning new methods and models. And I think one of my takeaways from today so far is really wanting to lean in on accelerating our collective learning. So that's a bit of a challenge put forward to all of you. We do know that when stakeholders, policymakers, and institutional leaders have and use data about the challenges and contributions of women, girls, and gender-diverse people, they develop smarter and more effective solutions that can accelerate progress towards gender equality, and that, as I mentioned, then can create healthier, stronger, and resilient communities. So coming back to my financial sector example, we were able to look at the supply side and the demand side around financial services for women, and specifically financial products in 6 countries. And combining that data that collected on women and girls and women as account holders with potential business models that could appeal actually to the financial sector and really yield returns for them, what we found was that there was about a $628 million opportunity that had been left on the table per country. So that's on average, so ranging from 352 million in Honduras to 1.16 billion in Turkey. And so from that research, we were able to both quantify the opportunity that was on the table and take that solution-oriented approach. And we developed a playbook that's a 5-step process that can catalyze data disaggregation journeys for countries. And I think it can apply to the financial sector and potentially other sectors. Things like diagnosing the issue, so taking that data-driven approach, raising awareness, because we've talked about data is not just about the data, it's about people and change. Developing data systems. So if without a solid data system, it's really hard to use data effectively. Building capacity on the ground, and we've talked about some ways that that's happening through academic institutions and partners, and then using data to spur action. 2 other quick examples of solutions. By combining data sets, so combining things like geospatial data, safety incident reports, and call data, cities and communities can look at and provide guidance on how public transit policy reform can promote economic and educational opportunities for women, essentially making it easier for them to get to work or to school. We are also looking at new data ownership models, because I think as we go forward, we want to make sure that there's opportunities for individuals and communities to benefit from the data that they're generating and sharing. I'll stop there, but the list goes on.
Thank you so much, Krista. And now back to Holly. I'd love if you could tell us more about the impressive work that you're leading and you're doing with different partners. Thank you.
Oh, I don't. Okay. So expanding access. We have 3 solutions, one for today, one for tomorrow, or like Monday because it's a weekend, and one for later. So today we have a Data Fellows program. We work with donors so that we can facilitate access to our rich data partner resources for their grantees. And we found this is the most efficient mechanism to satisfy all of our legal and security needs to ensure the data sets get to where they can have an impact. The next are data collaboratives. So we have, as I said, this technical, legal, governance infrastructure, but to date we've only supported individual projects. There actually isn't very much reason why we couldn't pull the data scientists from our different international organization members and our data fellows and our data partners to collaborate together on larger challenges, such as those related to climate health or recovery after a disaster. And the later, so we know how to do the matchmaking, and we've solved some of the really thorny legal challenges in making data sharing possible. And what we would really like to do is to create a world data catalog for privately held data so that there's common metadata standards for companies to register. They agree to common sets of terms of use that are compatible with those of academia or international organizations and solve that discovery challenge. And if anyone is interested in collaborating today, tomorrow, or later, please let us know. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, Gabriela, I'd love if you could share the initiatives that UNESCO and you're working with in addressing those challenges, also the challenges for the future related to AI, as you mentioned.
Well, let me tell you that one of the questions that we pose with the recommendation on the ethics of AI, and by the way, ethics is not just a good reflection of the good or bad. Ethics translate into protecting and promoting human rights, human dignity, environmental sustainability, gender equality. So, and then you need to go to transparency, accountability, all those things, and policy conclusions. What we wanted to know is where are countries in this landscape in terms of managing the digital transformation and the data governance, which is at the core of everything. So we developed a readiness assessment methodology, and we are working with 50 countries all around the world, many G20 countries, but then also a lot of countries in Africa and Latin America, to understand where they are in terms not only of being consumers, but also of users of data, producers of data, and the governance of data. And it was impressive because we compare with many indexes that are out there measuring the capacities of governments to deal with AI, and the majority of those indexes, as good as they are, just cover the global north. So you don't have data about the global south, which is a big thing to say. So now we're getting these 50 methodologies working with many different countries. We're gonna standardize the information. It's not only about this other question, because you produce these technologies for profit, for technological edge, for competing, but at the end, the problem is how do we use it to improve the outcomes for people, the fairness, all these questions that we are talking about. And at the end, what we are delivering is a huge data set of understanding what countries need to be doing to have the data they need, to govern the data in a way that is appropriate, and then also to build their own capacities to discuss these issues. It's not only about investments. Investments are included, infrastructure, access, all of these things, but also the competencies of governments, the data scientists in the governments. Because at the end, we have heard all these panels, amazing applications on health, on children, I know many of the tools that are used to stop human trafficking. What else more important than stopping human trafficking or child labor or gender issues? But at the end, governments there, and this is something that I have not heard in the conversation a lot, the capacities of governments to also step up to frame and shape the direction of this conversation, which is super important.
Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of systematizing that knowledge, capacity building, really, to addressing those gaps. And now, Shikoh.
So, I mean, when I was thinking about solutions, and I'm sitting here from somebody who works and lives in Africa, I organize my solutions into 3 buckets: data, talent, and application. And some of it has been touched upon, so I'm just going to emphasize on those points. So from data, we have already, belabored the point that the data, especially on the African continent, does not exist. And if it exists, the format it exists in needs to be rethought. So that's number 1. So I'm happy to be part of the Lacuna Steering Committee, and Lacuna is, I have to read it. Lacuna Fund aims to put the voices of data scientists, researchers, and social entrepreneurs from the global south in the data. That's why I serve in this committee, because it does an amazing work in bringing those voices of the data scientists in the south in contributing to data. And what I love about it is we have already, up to this point, created 58 data sets, and 42 of them are from Africa. I'm very proud of them. And 17 of them are live and public. If you want to go and play around with them, I'll send you a link. So for me, the data part is actually being solved for. And yes, Lacuna is still fundraising, so please, if you have money, you can send to them. Number 2 is talent, and this is my personal passion. I always say I was amongst the privileged few who got educated and exposed to Western education, and I had to go back home. It can't just be me. We have a continent of 19-year-olds, many of them who are on the internet, who are using this data. We need to empower them to be data scientists, analysts, and contribute to their future. And how do we do this? We have to be more out of the box thinking. I love what the University of Chicago are doing. We are going to be working with them. They've committed. So I jumped on that opportunity. But number 2, what we are doing, and I'm going to jump on your offer, is we are working on something we are calling data fellowships. This is working with out-of-school youth, somebody with a high school degree. They can do some maths, yeah? And training them on how to collect data at their local community, yeah? I live in a village in the middle of Kenya. I'm able to understand, this is the number of people who live in my village, how many people live with disability, how many kids are going to school, and I'm able to collect this data that is then aggregated at a national level. I'm working on this from an organization called the Open Institute, yeah? And they do an amazing job in keeping governments accountable around this. Number 2 is training them. So we got a very small grant from the Gates Foundation to work with young youth on how to be data scientists and data analysis on the ground. They don't need a PhD. I always say I have a PhD, so I have the moral authority to say you don't need a PhD to actually do data science. So just training them on simple data analysis. How do you crunch these numbers that we have? How do you start extracting, cleaning it up, and analyzing? And for this, the project that you talked about, the one that we didn't have any data for modeling Kenya, we have an amazing program. It's called the Center for Epidemiological Modeling and Analysis, CEMA.Africa. If you go there, you'll see an amazing dashboard where we've managed to collect, aggregate, and organize Kenyan health data in a way that government officials of any cadre can go and see the state of the health of their small ward. And for me, that has been the most impactful thing we've done. And finally, application. Governments needs to see what is this data about. Data is the new oil, so what? People actually need to see it live in action for them to believe, at least in our continent, and we need to do it. So for me, those 3 things are the ones that we need to think about in terms of interventions and solutions. Because if you don't touch in all of these things or just one of them, we are going to have a failing work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shikoh. And now, just to wrap up, I'd like our panelists to share in one sentence a key takeaway and recommendation that you'd like to share with everyone. Krista.
Great. So as technology changes and competing power grows, it's more important than ever that we're inclusive and intentional about gender data. If we think about Doreen Bogdan-Martin's scaffolding metaphor for data, if we don't invest in that scaffolding, we are in a very precarious situation.
Thank you. Qhala.
We are a very, very, very small team, -- but we have been able to achieved so much through collaboration with other international organizations and outreach, even within our organizations. And we're very grateful for that. Just to repeat the message of collaboration that's been throughout today's sessions.
Again, let me just bring it to the systemic issue. And I think that governments need to have data strategies. Governments don't even have laws for privacy. 60% of countries don't have data privacy. They need to put in place the evaluation and the quality of data. They need to have appropriate safeguards to address surveillance concerns, encourage enterprises to go for quality assessments, ensure individuals retain their rights over their personal data, including the right to delete your footprint in the internet, which is not granted, ensure full security of personal data, and then promote open data, invest in data trust, annotating data set. So I think there is so much that needs to be done to organize this in a good manner. And let me tell you, all what I read was one of the chapters of the recommendation that was signed by these 193 countries, so we are holding them accountable.
Thank you so much. And Shikoh.
So for me, I think I want to emphasize on the idea that 1% of the world cannot inform the data direction of the 99% of the world. So we need to invest in talent of the underrepresented part of the world. That might be women. I speak very strongly as an African woman. That might be from Africa. We actually need to be very deliberate in making sure that talent from those places is informing not only our foundational models and our LLMs, but also the data that is informing these foundational models and LLMs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of work ahead of us. So you heard the panel. Thank you.